This is a product that I really wanted to try because I wanted to see how it gets on against Eversolo's DMP-A6, a product clearly hot off the press at the moment and well revved up. But let's be clear to start with too. These have different use cases. The FiiO R7 is an upright desktop touchpad streaming DAC with headphone use. The Eversolo is a horizontal HiFi rack based touchpad streaming DAC without a headphone amp. So this white R7, which costs £670, it's slightly more expensive than the black version I believe, is based on the Android 10 operating system, much like Eversolo use Android as well. And that means that you can basically go on the Play Google Store and download any number of apps. You can even get Facebook or YouTube working with it. Or you can go on FiiO's own store. You can download a kind of sub-menu or select list of music apps that are available from the Play Store. Obviously, you can download any music app that there is from Amazon, Tidal, Spotify, Qobuz, Deezer, and so on. And this gives it huge versatility so far as music playback is concerned, because you're not stuck with only being able to play back certain apps that are available on that streamer. I mainly use Roon myself, and this streamer is actually Roon ready, but before it's visible in Roon on Roon Remote or desktop apps, you have to jog FiiO's own internal app for Roon, which is basically a play, pause, skip, repeat screen. It's not allowing you to select music, but interestingly, you can go on the Google Play Store and download Roon Remote and then use Roon Remote on the FiiO R7 itself, so that it's kind of a remote and player at the same time. That's perhaps not much of an advantage though if you're using this R7 in situ on your rack and you're sitting on a couch, because you're going to be sitting some way away and obviously you can't operate it. So in all likelihood, you're going to be using another laptop or tablet or phone in order to control Roon. It is though pretty neat in a desktop system because you can use the touchpad to control your music and select your music, avoiding the need to go into apps on your computer if you're working on other stuff. And I did actually find that pretty neat. You can apparently get a remote control with this that works like a mouse and moves to your hand movements so far as interactivity on the display is concerned. But I don't know how useful that is because I've not tried it. Conceivably though, it may not replace a laptop or tablet at your couch, specifically using Roon or other apps, because it depends upon obviously how far away you are. I use Tidal mainly, and it's important to stress that this isn't a Tidal Connect streamer, or Spotify Connect for that matter. So if you were using Tidal, you'd have to AirPlay to the unit from within the Tidal app. That's not a biggie for me, not being able to have Tidal Connect or Spotify Connect, because I mainly use Tidal, which is integrated into Roon. I understand it that Android downsamples the bitrate in music apps. Now for me, I mainly use Apple products, iPads, iPhones and a MacBook. I also use a PC. But this isn't a problem with the R7 because FiiO have restricted the Android operating system from downsampling, so-called SRC, sample rate conversion, in both apps on the unit itself and in the FiiO Music app, which I'll come on to. The R7 really makes sense for me because when I do my video editing, I put all the clips on the timeline, and at that point I'm not that bothered with how everything sounds. I don't need flash amplifiers or flash speakers. And then at the point I do the actual volume editing and the sound edit, I plug headphones in and listen and adjust volume more accurately. And I'm going from a JCAT USB card XE sound card in my video editing PC to an HiFi Zen DAC version 2, cheapest chips DAC, and then from there into a Burst and Funk amplifier, which has a Class A headphone output and a Class AB stereo output to a pair of speakers, for which I run cheap Cambridge Audio Minx Min 22 speakers. They're passive speakers, by the way. But if I'm honest, I think it's a bit of a convoluted system with too many boxes. And if I went for the R7, I can cut down on my box count by having a DAC, a headphone amp, a preamp, and a touchpad streamer all in one box. And again, if I want to cut down on my box count even further and avoid the need for a power amp, I could match the R7 with FiiO's own SP3 active speakers, which I may actually do. I should say that these front dials, one as the on-off and volume dial, the other as the output dial, they're made from nice knurled metal. And so far as output settings go, you've got 4 options. First, headphones only, or headphones and pre-outs, obviously if you're going to be using a power amp or active speakers. Thirdly, just pre-outs. Obviously these 3 settings allow you to use the volume control. And then lastly, you've got a line out setting which sends maximum volume to your component, because you're going to be using it with maybe a preamplifier or an integrated amplifier that has a volume dial. And usefully, when you select this, the display says, do you really want to do this? Which is a nice, very helpful feature, because you don't want to be sending a full volume signal, obviously, to a power amp and then onto speakers where that power amp doesn't have a volume dial. Your speakers will go kaput. I don't actually think the case of this R7 is aluminium, which isn't a biggie. And I say that because it feels really sturdy and heavy. But when you put your finger over the top and the panel lines, the panels are very flush one to another. I don't think this, whether it's aluminium or not, is a big disadvantage or any disadvantage, because whatever, it is nicely made and it looks like aluminium. But what really pricks your ears up about the R7 so far as hi-fi use is concerned is connectability. So XLR balanced outputs, 2 sets of single-ended RCA outputs that are interchangeable for line-outs and pre-outs if you want to connect another headphone amp or powered speakers. And then you've got digital and coax outputs if you want to then maybe upgrade your DAC. And on the input side, you've got digital and coax again, taking USB out for the moment, which I'll come on to, if you want to add other digital sources. But this is a DSD and MQA streaming DAC, and it's also DLNA compliant from the FiiO Music app in the unit itself. So I was able to find music off my Inuos Zenith over the network. I was also able to find music on my SSD drive on my Eversolo. And I too have a cheapest chips Western Digital NAS as well. Another thing is that it's Wi-Fi and LAN capable, and this little plastic strip on the back is the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth aerial, because remember, Bluetooth and Wi-Fi can't get out of a metal box, so you need to have an external aerial. But also, which is useful for the R7, is the little SD card slot at the back, and this is allowing you to play music in the FiiO Music app. Usefully, they've bunged in a micro SD card adapter, so you can use micro SD cards as well as standard SD cards. So coming back to the digital USB side, the USB-A and USB-C ports are both outputs and inputs. So outputs so far as connecting to another DAC, inputs so far as playing music off USB pen drives or USB drives. And there also is a plethora of other connection options, from connecting USB expansion hubs, copying music from computers onto the SD cards and internal storage of the unit, and also connecting up their KB1K keyboard, which looks like to be a kind of rudimentary keyboard with various simple functions on it. But also you can connect it to a monitor, because I know from my Eversolo video that a lot of people were asking, how can I output the display to a bigger monitor? Because I know that a lot of people like to see all their album art and music information on a big TV. But on the subject of DACs, it uses one single ES9068AS DAC chip into two THX AAA 788 Plus headphone amps. So technically it's not a dual mono design as I understand it. To be dual mono, you technically have to have a DAC per channel following all the way through the chain. On the subject of Bluetooth, as I alluded to, this unit has send and receive capability. Power can actually be AC off the mains or DC at 12 volts 3 amps via this little barrel socket and switch at the back. And they recommend for this purpose using their PL50 linear power supply. The one I got cost £135 in the UK off amazon.co.uk. And it is very, very nicely made. In fact, I don't think I've seen a linear power supply at such a cheap price as well made. It seems to be in collaboration with another audio company. And I also used Silent Angel's £2,500 Forester F2. It's a kind of multiple output power supply that can output various voltages and amps. If you flick the little DC switch at the back, you can make comparisons of sound quality with and without the linear power supply. But remember, if you do have it on DC, everything is powered by the power supply. So pull out the AC power cord because you don't want it interfering with the circuits of the unit. The other thing that you can do to make direct comparisons is with the DSD conversion mode. It is somewhat nuanced, although you do notice a slightly tonally relaxed character, a very sort of smooth and toned character to the sound. But as I say, it is slight. Now, the first thing to say about sound quality into a hi-fi system, it is very resolving and detailed, but it also has broad strokes with regards to its imaging. But if you've got a half decent or decent system and you're using this as a streaming DAC, it's absolutely essential to use the PL50 power supply. And as regards the analog outputs of this R7 PL50 combo, it's way ahead of the Bluesound Node 2021s in terms of dynamic range, but then that's perhaps not surprising with the price hike, but it is quite considerable. I'm going to describe my 10 to 20 hours of listening against the £760 Eversolo DMP-A6 in the description below, so please read that too. But for the purposes of keeping it nice and concise, I'm just going to go into the main factors that I found. And without using a PSU with the R7, I found, at least in a hi-fi setup, the Eversolo is way ahead. It's in this sort of shouty mid-range to treble presentation with the R7 acting alone that is in contrast to the Eversolo. It gives the impression of being slightly more forward with its treble. The Eversolo in comparison is much more coherent with the separation between the mid-range and the treble, and there's more depth staging on offer. But when you add either of the PSUs that I mentioned, and I recommend the PL50 alone being more than good enough a partner, this mid-range to treble shouty presentation disappears. It becomes much closer, and this somewhat springy, rebounding and elastic approach to bass, which was, I think, referred to in another review. He was actually, I think, referring to bass when he was comparing the R7 and the Eversolo, is definitely something that I can agree with. So still sticking to comparisons in hi-fi, I found that the Eversolo has deeper bass, but it's less elastic and springy. The FiiO, on the other hand, has less depth staging, even with the PSU connected. I found that the Eversolo just seems to pop out of the recording more. And I would say that more people will probably prefer the Eversolo, because I think that this depth staging is so important, and it becomes, when they're trading blows in other areas, the most discernible difference between the two and the most obvious character of the Eversolo over the FiiO. It is small but discernible, and if I was pushed, I'd say it's in the order of 5 to 10%. And another reason why I think that is probably because staging or sound staging is one of the most important areas in hi-fi in terms of sound characteristics, as well as things like resolution and transient attack. And when I did this comparison between the FiiO and its power supply against the Eversolo using their digital outputs to a DAC, I used my Chord Qtist with its own MCRU linear power supply. I found similar characteristics. But as I'll come on to say, this far from cast the R7 out, so keep watching. So the reason why this player isn't cast out is, as I said at the top of the video, it's a streaming desktop headphone DAC. In fact, if you look at their box, on it, it says all-in-one desktop Android hi-fi music player. Couldn't be clearer. I ran my Hi-Fi Man Aria Stealth planar magnetic headphones with the R7 and compared it to a Bluesound Node 2021 and SMSL HO200 headphone amp. Outputs about the same power as this FiiO, and I found that the R7 combo with the PL50 I'm talking about as well, there was way more pleasing resolution and dynamic transient attack compared to that SMSL and Bluesound combo, probably down to the DAC in the Bluesound. In my Zen DAC version 2 system with the Burst and Funk, about the same price as this FiiO Duo, it's clear again that the R7 has a way stronger DAC, and although I appreciated the Class A roundedness of the Burson, when I uploaded a target EQ curve in Roon to suit these headphones, I found this online on a HeadFi page. Again, I found that I preferred the R7 to the HiFi Burson combo. It was just the way stronger performer. Oh, just to talk about EQ for a minute, since we're on that subject, if you're playing music through the FiiO Music app and you're playing music off the internal storage, SD card, network shares, or via USB devices, then you can EQ in FiiO Music. It doesn't act as an output to all other apps, so you are reliant on those other apps having EQ for it to work. I have to give a shout out to Lachlan on his YouTube channel called Passion for Sound, where he reviewed the R7, and he mentioned that he didn't think there was much of a sound quality improvement using the linear power supply with headphones. I think he used the PL50 as well. I kind of agree with him. You can flick the switch on and off, and if anything, I'd say the difference was very, very slight. There is slightly more air in the soundstage and the recording, listening with the power supply. Also a little bit more tracing and etching of treble around musical notes. But it's not a lot, it's very, very slight. But the fact that you can use this without the PSU and it being more than favourable against the Burson HiFi system for less money, albeit into easy to drive headphones, tells you that the R7 as a streaming headphone DAC isn't compromised. To sum this product up and give my final thoughts, it is pretty accomplished in a hi-fi system, particularly with the PL50 power supply. I like the lovely interface touchpad screen. I like its sound quality, and it's hugely flexible with the number of apps that you can access. Okay, it may not be of the same ilk as the Eversolo DMP-A6 so far as sound quality is concerned in a hi-fi system, but this unit itself shines in desktop use for the purpose for which it's intended. And now I'm going to be using this unit, which was donated to me as part of this review, and by the way, it doesn't change my view at all, bearing in mind my comments about the Eversolo. I'm going to be using it now in my desktop system. It's that good. Thanks very much for watching.